So, good day everyone. So, today we will be discussing about the chapter 12. Actually, this is part 2 of the chapter 12, the personality assessment methods. So, I am Christine Hanamis Bonotan and I am your reporter for today. So, the production of figure drawings. So, a relatively quick, easy administered projective technique is the analysis of drawings. So, drawings can provide a psychodiagnostication, a wealth of clinical hypotheses to be confirmed or discarded by the other findings of the result. So, attempts have been made to use artistic productions as a source of information about intelligence, neurological intactness, visual motor coordination, cognitive development, and even learning disabilities. So, figure drawings are an appealing source of diagnostic data because the instructions for them can be administered individually or in a group by non-clinicians such as teachers, and no materials other than a pencil and paper are required. So, figure drawings is said to be a convenient form of personality assessment since non-clinicians or non-psychologists, non or those people who wanted to administer the test can actually do so because it only involves or it only needs a pencil and a paper for the assessee to take the test. So, figure drawing test. So, this is a projective method of personality assessment where the assessee produces a drawing that is analyzed on the basis of the content. So, generally, figure drawing test is administered by the by only the use of paper and the pencil. So, the the personality will be assessed by the assessor based on the content of the drawing of the child or the assessee. So, whatever he or she draws, so that would be the basis for the rating of the psychological assessment or the personality assessment conducted by the assessor. So, next, um, so one example of a figure drawing test is a draw a person test. So the instruction of administering DAP or the draw a person test is straightforward. So the examinee is given a pencil and a blank paper and told to draw a person. So DAP production is formally evaluated through analysis of various characteristics of their drawing. So attention has been given to such factors as the length of time used by the assessee, the symmetry, the line quality, the shading, the presence of erasures, facial expressions, posture, clothing, and overall appearance. So various hypotheses have been generated based on this factor. So for example, the placement of the figure on the paper is seen as representing how the paper might have presenting how the individual functions within the environment. So the placement of the child's drawing or the person he is about to draw um, will reflect a or will represent how the individual functions within the environment. Also, it is said that the characteristics of the individual drawn. So, for example, unusually large eyes or large ears suggest suspiciousness. Ideas of reference or other paranoid characteristics. So, if ever dako kaayo og ay naay parts sa taong gidrawing sa bata na dagko kaayo or gamay, so that would lead to the scoring or that would be the basis of the assessor for the rating or the scoring of the child's work. And also, um, so a child will use an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. So in the drawing, note also that the area below the waist is underemphasized relative to the upper body. So according to Hamner, the slightness of the drawing from the waist down may be compensated for by the sheer forcefulness of the upper body. So a final observation with respect to the drawing is a fact that itself is right for psychodynamic interpretation. So the interpretation of the assessor with regards to the personality of the child um, will be based on the drawing that the child made. So immediately after the examinee finished the first drawing, they are handed a second sheet of paper and told to draw a person of the opposite sex. So after the examinee has completed the drawing, a rather detailed or inquiry will be followed. So that is hangyuon na pud ang assessee or the child to draw a person of the opposite sex. So say for example, babae ang gipag-drawing ug una sa assessor. So the next one would be uh, a girl. So if a girl comes first, so ang boy na pod ang ipa-second na i-draw sa bata. So next, figure drawing test is the house tree person test. So it is another type of projective drawing test that the test taker draws a house, tree, and a person that different aspects of the human figure is presumed to be a reflective psychological functioning. So the ways in which an individual represent a house and a tree are considered symbolically significant. So in this test, gina-ask ang bata na mag-draw og balay, a tree, and a person. So after the examiner has completed the drawing, so a detailed inquiry follows. So the examiner is asked to identify each of the figures. Okay, kung nganong dako niya og draw ang balay or mas dako ba ang gi-draw niya ang person or ang tree. So kana na content sa drawing would be now basis for the scoring or the rating of the assessor. So kung dako ang balay siguro that reflects a psychological uh, a certain psychological functioning sa bata. So next, we have the kinetic family drawing, the KFD. So the examinee, though not usually a child, is instructed to draw a picture of everyone in the family doing something. Try to draw the whole people, not cartoons or sticks. So make everyone do something or kind of action. So in this one, it is not necessarily na child ang imuhang assessee. So and then it he or she will be asked to draw a picture of everyone in the family, the tanan member sa family nga naay ginabuhat, may it be ang mama nagluto or like that. And then after na ma-draw na to sa bata, the assessor will ask question or mag-ask siya og inquiry after na nahuman na og draw ang bata. So the examinee is asked to identify each one of the figures. So i-identify niya kung kinsa tong naglingkod. So, iya ba tong kuya, yang ate, mama, or papa. And then talk about the relationship or kanang i-state sa child kung um, what is the relationship with this. So, mama, so gaano ka deep and saang do you have a good relationship with your mother, with your father, and ana. And then and detail what they are doing in the picture and why. So a number of formal scoring systems for the KFD are available. So daghan og kanang types sa scoring or scaling system sa KFD. So dito sila mag-base if um, what is the psychological functioning of the person na ilahang gina-assess. So objective test and projective test. So how meaningful is the dichotomy? So the so-called objective tests are affected by response styles, malingering, and other sources of test bias. As an alternative to the objective or projective dichotomy, so Weiner 2005 suggested substituting the term structured in place of objective and unstructured in place of projective. So Weiner of 2005 characterized the objective versus projective dichotomy as misleading. So truth in labeling is not served by characterizing one class of tests as objective in the face of many questions regarding their objectivity, and another class of tests as something other than objective. So observers might conclude that one group of tests is indeed objective while the other group of tests must be subjective. So, as intuitively appealing as Weiner's recommendations are, so old habits die hard, and the objective projective dichotomy remains very much with us today. So, this dichotomy, the objective test and projective test, so based kang Weiner, so suggest na lang niya nga i-substitute siya into two terms, the structured and unstructured. So behavioral assessment methods. So traits, states, motives, needs, drives, defenses, and related psychological constructs have no tangible existence. So meaning, dili gyud nato sila magunitan. Ang traits dili nato magunitan, ang states, ang motives, ang needs, ang drives, and defenses sa isa ka person so have no tangible existence. So the traditional approach to assessment might therefore be labeled a sign approach because test responses are deemed to be signs or clues to underlying personality or ability. So in contrast to this traditional approach is an alternative philosophy of assessment that may be termed the sample approach. So the sample approach focuses on the behavior itself. So So the emphasis in behavioral assessment is on what a person does in situations rather than on inferences about what attributes he has more globally. So behavioral assessment is more focused kung unsang ginabuhat sa tao. It is more focused on the behavior of a person rather than katong mga physical attributes niya or kanang mga makita nato sa iyahang lawas ing ana. So we are in behavioral assessment, we dig deep to those behavior that a person has or iyahang ginabuhat from day to day living. So to illustrate behavioral observation as an assessment strategy, consider the plight of the single female client who represents herself in the counseling center. So she complains that even though all her friends tell her how attractive she is, she has great difficulty meeting men so much so that she doesn't wanna try anymore. So ang gibuhat sa counselor from the client is that first interview the client about this problem. So um Nag-interview niya ang client kung anong na siya problem with meeting men when in fact she is attractive according to her friends. So second, administer appropriate test to the client. So this would be the time na mag-select ang counselor o appropriate na test para sa client or behavioral test nga ihatag niya iyang administer sa iyahang client. So the third is ask the client to keep a detailed diary of her thoughts and behaviors related to various aspects of her efforts to meet men. So diri with regards to the diary, um, di ba isulat niya so tahay every ay this day unsa ang iyang thoughts and behaviors related to kanang maningkamot ba siya nga um, makihingaw sa mga boys ng ana. Fourth, accompany the client on a typical night out to a single bar or similar venue and observe her behavior. So, diri sa diri sa last part, diri ana mo sulod ang behavioral assessment because of the term na observation. There would be an observation by the assessor. So, with regards to the diary, the client is engaging in self-observation since siya mismo ang musulat kung unsa iyang naobserbahan sa iyang sarili based on her behavior. So, in this scenario of the night out or katong sa last part na makipag adto ang client sa singles bar, so the counselor is doing the actual observation na. Kaiyahan nang gitan-aw or gina-observe ang babae kung unsa iyang behavior towards men. So, a traditional administration of psychological tests might yield signs that could be inferred to relate to the problem. So, in contrast to the sign approach, the clinician employing the sample approach to assessment might examine the behavioral diary the client kept. So, an advantage of sign approach over the sample approach of that in the hands of a skillful perspective perceptive clinician. So the client might be put in touch with feelings that even she was not really aware of. So before the assessment. So according to the counselor, so the clients expressed fear of going outdoors and ultimately her fear of meeting men might in some way be related to an unconscious fear of promiscuity. So a fear of becoming a streetwalker. So the client may have been consciously or not really aware or unconsciously avoiding certain thoughts and images, those attendant on the expression of her sexuality, for example, and this inability to deal with those thoughts and images may indeed have been a factor contributing to her ambivalence about meeting men. So, the who, what, when, where, why, and how of it. So, this um, is with regards to the behavioral assessment, the who, what, when, where, why, and how of behavioral assessment. So who is the assessee? So the assessee is the person being assessed. Maybe, for example, a patient on a closed psychiatric ward, or a client seeking for help at a counseling center, or a subject in an academic experiment. So regardless of whether the assessment is for research, clinical, or other purposes, the hallmark of behavioral assessment is the intensive study of individuals. So the assessee would be the client or those people who are being assessed too. So who is the assessor? So depending on the circumstances, the assessor may be a highly qualified professional or a technician or assistant or trained to conduct a particular assessment. So for example, a psychologist, a psychiatrist. So that is the um, assessor. So technicians are frequently employed to record the number of times a targeted behavior is exhibited. So in this context, the assessor may also be a classroom teacher. For example, the number of times a child leaves her or his seat will be recorded by the classroom teacher. So now she is called the assessor. So an assessor in behavioral assessment may also be the assessee. So meaning, is behavioral assessment, if nahimo kang assessor, you can also be the assessee. Assessees are frequently directed to maintain behavioral diaries, so complete behavioral checklists or engage in other activities designed to monitor their own behavior. So next is the what. So what in behavioral assessment is being measured, or what is being measured in behavioral assessment? So the behavior or behaviors targeted for assessment will vary as a function of the objectives of the assessment. So in here, the what is the kung saan gina-measure nimo sa inyong behavioral assessment, or what are you trying to assess. So for example, for the purpose of assessment, the targeted behavior must be measurable. So that is quantifiable in some way. So for example, katong sa client ka ganina, so atong gi-assess sa iyahang social interaction since dili kayo siya, um, since she is having a hard time with meeting with men. So the we are measuring the behavioral um, social interaction of the client. So when is an assessment of behavior is made? So assessment of behavior is typically made at times when the problem behavior is most likely to be elicited. So for example, if a pupil is most likely to get into verbal and physical altercations during lunch, so a behavioral assessor would focus on lunch hour as a time to assess the behavior. So so another way to address the when question has to do with the various schedules with which behavioral assessments may be made. Schedule of assessment is referred to as frequency or event recording. So we have the interval recording. So it is another schedule of assessment each time targeted behavior, of course, is recorded. So say for example, every other minute, so or every 24 hours or every third week, as long as nagakuan siya og interval for the recording of the behavior. Next is the intensity, tallying the number of times a particular behavior occurs. So this, say for example, kapila ni katong sa child, kapila niya gihapak iyang classmate, um, kapila siya nagsumpong ana nga day. So that is the intensity. So the record of the intensity of the behavior. So it is so next we have the duration. So duration of the behavior is stated in numbers of seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, or years. So alternatively, it may be stated in terms of some ratio percentage of the time that the behavior occurs during a specified interval of time. So ang duration kay how long did the behavior last? So for example minutes lang ba niya gihunalan iyang classmate, or um, hours ba siya nagsumpong sa iyahang bad behavior. So ang ana ang duration. So the timeline follow back methodology. So originally designed for use in the context of clinical interview for the purpose of assessing alcohol abuse. So in here, respondents were presented with a specific calendar time period and asked to recall aspects of their drinking. So, kani siya is timeline follow back from the word itself. So, ginakuan og calendar time ang mga respondents or ang client and gina-ask sila to recall um, sa ilang patterns of thinking. So next, the ecological momentary assessment. So another assessment methodology that entails recording problem behavior-related events. So this is accomplished by a means of handheld computer used to maintain electronic diary of the behavior. So this methodology is used to analyze the immediate antecedents. So this is not retrospectively but as they occur. So ang kani siya from the word na momentary. So ang assessment lang is ginabuhat every time na ginabuhat sa tao ang behavior. Next is the where does the assessment takes place. So behavioral assessment may take place just about anywhere, preferably in an environment where the targeted behavior is most likely to occur naturally. So, for example, a behavioral assessor studying firsthand the obsessive-compulsive habits of a patient might wish to visit the patient at home to see firsthand the variety and intensity of the behaviors exhibited. So, unlike the psychological test na kailangan din private area or room para i-conduct siya because there are a variety of test questionnaire na kailangan niya ansiran. So, in behavioral assessment, kung asa most likely mo occur ang iyang behavior, say for example, katong bata na nag-aaway sa iyahang classmate, so preferably sa school ang place na i-conduct ang behavioral assessment or that is the place where the assessment takes place. So, kung asa ginanagabuhat og ing ato nga behavior ang client. So why? So why conduct behavioral assessment? So in general, data derived from behavioral assessment may have several advantages over data derived from other means. So mas mas helpful kung ang data is from the behavioral assessment kay makita man gid nimo na amo na ang ginabuhat sa tao and you have your observation on your client. So you are said to be more knowledgeable about the client's behavior all throughout sa imuhang assessment. So in some situations, so the only, ay, how no? As a why? So to provide behavioral baseline data, with which other behavioral data may be compared. So say for example, you are you are assessing a with regards to the drinking patterns of a person. So say for example na accumulate na nimo ang data tapos naghatag na kag intervention. So after naghatag kag intervention, so magamit pa to nimong data nga imuhang nakuha from the behavioral observation na imong gibuhat. After, so ma-compare nimo siya if naabay changes na nahitabo or the intervention given is actually beneficial or tama. Next, to provide a record of the assess's behavioral strengths and weaknesses in various situations. So behavioral assessment is also essential to provide a record of the assess's. So, say for example, kung kailangan niya og um, record sa iyahang sa imong observation na nakita sa iyaha, since imo man ang i-take down notes tanan, so pwede siya makakapangayo og copy in various situation na ma makita niya or mabasahan niya. So to pinpoint environmental conditions that are acting to trigger, maintain, or extinguish certain behaviors. So to target specific behavioral patterns for modifications and to create graphic display useful in stimulating innovative or more effective um, treatment approach. So that is why we conduct behavioral assessment because daghan siya og benefits, daghan siya og um, mahatag, daghan siya og matabang, especially with those clinicians na naga naga ay mas preferred na makita jud ang behavior sa isa ka tao in conducting an assessment. So how is behavioral assessment conducted? It will vary, of course, according to the purpose of the assessment. So another how question relates to the analysis of data from behavioral assessment. So in some situations, the only special equipment required will be a trained observer with pad and pencil. So um, this requires a very observant na person. So kailangan po niya og paper o pencil to jot down notes or to take down notes mga important na behavior na ginapakita sa assessee. And in other types of situations, highly sophisticated recording equipment may be necessary. So, pwede na sila magamit og kato mga other equipments aside from the pad and pencil. So, varieties of behavioral assessment. So, behavioral assessment may be accomplished through various means, including behavior observation, behavior rating scales, analog studies, self-monitoring, and situational performance methods. So, in here, we have different types of means with regards to assessing behavior with clients. So, first, we have the behavioral observation. So, behavioral observation as its name implies, it involves watching the activities targeted clients and research subjects and typically maintaining record of those activities. So, say for example, a child psychologist observes a client in a playroom through a one-way mirror. So, or a family therapist views a videotape of a troubled family attempting to resolve a conflict, or a school psychologist observes a child interacting with peers in the school cafeteria. So it comes with it comes in many forms. Behavioral observation may it be you're just merely observing with a pencil and a paper, or you can use videotapes or recorder to record the actual footage of the behavior. So like that. Or and then researchers, clinicians, or counselors may themselves serve as observers. So pwede nga sila mismo mag-observe or they may designate trained assistants. So for other people or katong parents, sa clients, siblings ba, or teacher, and supervisors as the observers. So pwede sila mag-direct og tao para sila ang maka-observe sa client if they are not available. And even the observed person can be the behavior observer, although in such cases, the term self-observation is more appropriate than behavioral observation. So in here, um, maski na I just like what I've said a while ago, na kung ikaw mismo ang client, tapos ikaw po, you are making your own diary. So, ikaw man ang nag-observe merely sa imong self, so that would be now called as self-observation. You are observing yourself based on your thoughts, your feelings about yourself, and actually writing those thoughts and feelings you have. So behavior rating scale, so a pre-printed sheet on which the observer notes the presence or intensity of targeted behavior. So behavior rating scales and systems may be categorized in different ways. So ang kaning sa behavior rating scale kay there are various scales na ginagamit as of today. So it depends on the content or what behavior is being assessed by the assessor. So next is the self-monitoring. So may be defined as the act of systematically observing and recording aspects of one's own behavior and or events related to that behavior. So self-monitoring is both a tool of assessment and a tool of intervention. So in some instances, the very act of self-monitoring may be therapeutic. So this self-monitoring relies on observations of the behavior of clinical interest at the time and place of its actual occurrence. Then self-monitoring may be used to record specific thoughts, feelings, or behaviors of the client or the the assessee, him or herself. So self-monitoring is both a tool of assessment and intervention because practical issues that must be considered include the methodology employed, the targeting of specific thoughts, feelings, or behaviors, but the sampling procedures put in place, and the actual self-monitoring devices and procedures and the training and preparation. So, um, in some instances, the very act of self-monitoring may be therapeutic because you would know what are you doing, no unsa imong ginabuhat, like for example, you're smoking. So kabalo ka nga nag-smoke ka, tapos you are observing your own behavior. So um, you can actually help yourself to have the intervention kay murag na monitor na nimo na murag excessive na kaayo imong smoking na ginabuhat. So you can actually have an intervention for that based on the self-monitoring that you have. So next is the analog studies. So the behavioral approach to clinical assessment and treatment is linked to a researcher's approach to experimentation. So the behavioral assessor proceeds in many ways like a researcher. Why? Because the client's problem is the dependent variable, and the factor or factors responsible for causing or maintaining the problem behavior is the independent variable. So, I'm being the behavioral assessors, you can now be also called as, or you can be linked or alike to um, a researcher because you have the problem, which is the behavior of a person, and which is the dependent variable for researches. And then the independent variable there would be the factors that is affecting the behavior or the problem of the client. So the behavioral assessor may use the phrase functional analysis of behavior to convey the process of and identifying the dependent and independent variables concerning the presenting problem. So more specific than the term analog study is analog behavioral observation, which after Haynes may be defined as the observation of a person or persons in an environment designed to increase the chance that the assessor can observe targeted behaviors and interactions. So next we have the situational performance measures. So it's a procedure that allows for observation and evaluation of an individual under a standard set of circumstances. So a situational performance measure typically involves performance of some specific task under actual or simulated conditions. So say for example, you are applying for a part-time clerical job. So, gina-require ka to take a word processing test. So you have had the first-hand experience with situational performance measures with that because it allows you to have it allows your boss to have an observation and evaluation of you, the applicant, under a standard or a set of circumstances. Also, the road test you took to obtain your driver's license was a situational performance measure since um, this involves the evaluation of your driving skills in a real car on a real road in real traffic. So this 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 behavioral assessment is actually assessing your situational performance given a certain situation of how you will behave or what is your performance with that. So next, we have the leaderless group technique. So this is a situational assessment procedure wherein several people organize into a group for the purpose of carrying out a task as an observer records information to individuals, group members, initiative, cooperation, leadership, and related variables. So the leaderless group technique has been employed in military and industrial settings. So in here, um, this is a situational assessment procedure in which um, several people are organized into forming a group for the purpose of carrying out a task. Say for example, ang isa ka group gihatagan ng task. So, ang observer will record information related to the individual group members' um, initiative, cooperation, leadership, and related variables. So usually, ang mga group members kabalo nga gina-evaluate sila ang ilahang behavior is being observed and recorded. So purposely vague instructions are typically provided to the group and no one is placed in the position of leadership or authority. So sa ilaha, meaning there is inequality within the group kay dili sila magselect og leader nga maoy ilahang sundon. So each one of them could be a leader if they wanted to or if mapakita nila nga they have the ability to become one or mag-initiate of what would be their next step in a certain task or mag-suggest of procedures or unsa na ilang kailangan buhaton to surpass or to carry out a task or a challenge na ihatag sa ilaha. So next we have the role play. So it is a situational assessment procedure wherein several people organized into a group for the purpose of carrying out a task as an observer records information to individuals, group members, initiative, cooperation, leadership, and related variables. So the leader. Okay, so for the role play, it is an acting. Um, so department, for example, routinely prepare rookies for emergencies by having them role plays. So say for example, mag-role play sila of having a bomb attack or naabay attack milit from the People's Army. So in ana, so gina-practice ang ginakuan ilang behavioral functioning or unsay sila mag-behave when in times nga naay mga situations nga magipit sila or ingana. So, or naay hostage, naay gunpoint, so for the firemen, kanang naabay fire. So, role play, they are actually ginahanda ang mga ato ang mga military and other people in their particular job so that um, is used by them, that behavioral assessment is used by them to identify if successful bang performance sa isa ka aplikante. So, psychophysiological methods. So, the search for clues to understanding and predicting human behavior has led researchers to the study of physiological indices such as heart rate and blood pressure. So, psychophysiological is the term used to describe these variables as well as the method to study them. So, we have first the biofeedback. So, is a generic term that may be defined broadly as a class of physiological assessment technique designed to gauge, display, and record a continuous monitoring of selected biological processes such as pulse and blood pressure. So such so Depending on how biofeedback instrumentation is designed, so many different biological processes such as the heart rate, respiration rate, muscle tone, electrical resistance of the skin, and brain waves may be monitored and fed back to the assessee by visual displays such as lights and scales, or auditory stimuli such as bells and buzzers. So next we have the plethysmograph. plethysmograph. So it's a biofeedback instrument that records the changes in the volume of a part of the body arising in blood supply. So investigators use this device to explore changes in blood flow as dependent variable. So for example, Kelly found significant differences in the blood supplies of normal, anxiety-ridden, and psychoneurotic groups by using this device to measure the blood supply in the forearm. So next is the pineal plethysmograph. Is also an instrument designed to measure changes in blood flow, but more specifically blood flow independence. So because the volume of blood independence increases with male sexual arousal. So its application has been found in the assessment of adolescent and adult male sexual offenders. So in one study, subjects who were convicted rapists demonstrates more sexual arousal to descriptions of rapes and less arousal to consenting sex stories than did control subjects. So offenders who continue to deny deviant sexual object choices may be confronted with this next bullet, the phallometric data. So this is the record from a study conducted with female plethysmograph. So phallometric data also has treatment and program evaluation um, application. So in one such type of application, the offender or the rapist or a child molester or an exhibitionist or some other sexual offender is exposed to visual and or auditory stimuli depicting scenes of normal and deviant behavior while panel chromosomes is simultaneously gauged. So analysis of phallometric data is then used to evaluate the improvement as a result of the intervention. So next is the best well-known psychophysiological measurement tools is the polygraph or the lie detector. So although not commonly associated with psychological assessment, the lie detection industry has been characterized as one of the most important branches of psychology. So in here, this is especially true today given the frequency with which such tests are administered as well as the potential consequences as a result of such tests. So based on the assumption that detectable physical changes occur when an individual lies, The polygraph provides a continuous written record, variously referred to as a tracing, a graph, a chart, or a polygram of several physiological indices, so typically the respiration, the galvanic skin response, and blood volume or pulse rate. As an interviewer, an instrument operator, or known as a polygrapher or polygraphist, asks the assessee a series of yes or no questions. So the judgment of the truthfulness of the responses are made either informally by surveying the charts or more formally by means of a scoring system. So next is the unobtrusive measures. So it's a type of measure quite different from any we have discussed so far. It's the non-reactive or unobtrusive variety. In many instances, an, an unobtrusive measure is telling physical trace or record. So in one study, it was garbage, literally based on Cote et al. 1985. Because of their nature, unobtrusive measures do not necessarily require the presence or cooperation of respondents when measures are being conducted. So, um, in the now classic book that was almost entitled The Bullfighter's Beards, Webb et al. 1996 listed numerous examples of unobtrusive measures, which includes the following. So the first, the popularity of a museum exhibit can be measured by the examination of the erosion of the floor around it relative to the erosion around other exhibits. So say for example, ang erosion sa floor is high. So that would mean that popular ang museum kay daghan ang nagaadto nga tao, so murag ano ang floor. So mo na siya ang gina-compare sa other exhibit, sa erosion sa other museum, if and that is how they will know how popular a museum is. So next is the amount of whiskey consumption in a town can be measured by counting the number of empty bottles in the trash can. So yes, ma makita gyapon nila the amount of number by the number of empty bottles. So say for example, so kung dagan ang empty bottles, meaning dagan ang whiskey consumption sa isa ka town, since nahurot nito nila, and the empty bottles are the evidences that a town is having a high amount of whiskey consumption. Next, the degree of fear induced by session of telling ghost stories can be measured by noting the shrinking diameter of a circle of seated children. So say for example, a teacher tells a horror story. So um, it is it can be said na ho- um, kung kung na hadlok-hadlok ba ang story based sa number of children na magpabilin nga maminaw sa teacher. So, say for example, nanlakaw na ang uban, kaya nanghadlok na sila sa ghost stories na giing sa teacher, then the story is actually scary. So, the issues in behavioral assessment. So, we are now on the issues of behavioral assessment. So psychometric soundness of tools of behavior assessment can be evaluated, but how best to do that is debatable. So more specifically, so questions arise about the appropriateness on of various models of measurement. Kay murag, you may recall that classical test theory and generalizability theory conceptualize test score variation in somewhat different ways. So in generalizability theory, Rather than trying to estimate a single true score, consideration is given to how test scores would be expected to shift across situations as a result of changes in the characteristics being measured. So it is for this and related reasons that the generalizability theory seems more applicable to behavioral assessment than to the measurement of personality traits. So because behavior changes across situations, so as necessitating an approach to reliability that can account for those changes. So in contrast, kasi personality traits are assumed by many to be relatively stable across situations. A potential source of error in behavioral ratings may arise when a dissimilarity in two or more of the observed behaviors leads to a more favorable or unfavorable rating. So in here, so that would have been made had the dissimilarity not existed. I feel correct. So a behavior rating may be excessively positive or negative because a prior rating was excessively negative or positive. So this source of error is referred to as a contrast effect. So contrast effects have been observed in interviews, in behavioral diaries and checklists, in laboratory-based performance evaluations, and in the field performance evaluations. So the contrast effect may even be at work in some judgments of the Olympics. In one study of employment interviews, as much as 80% of the total variance was thought to be due to contrast effects. So to combat contrast effects and other types of rating error, rigorous training of raters is necessary. However, such training may be costly in terms of time and labor. So, for example, teaching professionals how to use the behavior observation and coding system of the marital interaction coding system took 2 to 3 months of weekly instruction and practice to learn how to use its 32 codes. So another approach to minimizing error and providing inter-rater reliability among behavioral raters is to employ a composite judgment, which is, in essence, an averaging of multiple judgments. So some types of observer bias cannot be practically or readily remedied. For example, so in behavioral observation, involving the use of video equipment, it would on many occasions be advantageous if multiple cameras and recorders could be used to cover various angles of the ongoing action to get close-ups and so forth. So ano siya, very costly siya. So, so as we have already noted in the context of self-monitoring, reactivity is another possible issue with regards to behavioral assessment because people react differently in experimental setting than in natural situations. So say for example, the client would know that he's being recorded or he's being observed. So maybe in the experimental setting, he would behave differently than in natural situations. So um, the the response of the client um, is not the same all the time, especially when he knows that he's being observed or he's being recorded. So some of the other possible limitations of behavioral approaches include equipment cost and the cost of training behavioral assessors. So as what I've said, very costly siya because we might be needing a lot of cameras when it comes to recording, and we also needs to train we also need to train those assessors very, very well since they need to have that ability to observe in various situations. So one final issue we will raise has to do with integrating and reconciling behavioral conceptualizations of psychopathology with the more traditional conceptualization mm, of psychopathology with the more traditional conceptualizations such as those found in DSM-5. So researchers such as Woods and Anderson 2016 are working to develop common ground in the way that members of different theoretical approaches can conceptualize personality and psychopathology. So one day, for example, we may be talking about general and specific factors in personality disorder. So, so another boost to discussion of general and specific to intelligence. So that would be discussed with the with that would be discussed with the next reporters. So that would be all for with chapter 12 personality assessment methods. Thank you so much and have a good day.